Hi, it's an honor to introduce you to our next candidate. Paul Clements is running for the House of Representatives from Michigan, District 6. Fortunately, he does not have a primary. He is the candidate. But who he's running against, you really want to know about this. He's running against Fred Upton. Fred Upton has been called by the LA Times the biggest enemy, the #1 enemy of the planet, because Congressman Upton, this is a climate change denier, and yet he chairs the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House of Representatives. If that doesn't motivate you to make sure that Paul Clements wins this seat, I don't know what does. But Paul Clements is not just a run-of-the-mill corporate Democrat either. This is a man who attended Harvard undergrad as on scholarship and has a PhD in economics from Princeton University. So whether it's economic inequality, campaign finance, climate and alternative energy, rebuilding middle class and manufacturing in the United States, Paul Clements is on it. Paul, welcome to the summit. I'm really glad that you're here.
Thanks, Marianne. My pleasure.
Now, Paul, I read something that you wrote, and I went, yes, and you yourself as a PhD in economics have a lot that you can say about this. You yourself are a professor of poli-sci at Western Michigan University. I read somewhere that you said 30 years of free market fundamentalism has, and then you went on to talk about what this has done to our country and also what it has done, what needs to be done now. Talk to us about these 30 years of free market fundamentalism so everybody really understands what that means and what has resulted.
Sure. Well, it actually helps to go back a little further, because after World War II, we had about 35, 40 years where we had really good economic growth, and the workers, the working people, they got a good share of that growth. You know, maybe 30, 40, 50%. But then, around the time of Ronald Reagan, we started moving in a different direction, and this idea of free market fundamentalism, neoliberalism, that all you need is just a free market, and that's going to raise all the boats. Well, it doesn't. It hasn't worked here, didn't work in Latin America, didn't work in Africa. That what we've seen is that in those countries that have had increasing growth in manufacturing and in other high tech, that you see government working with business, working with labor, to say, how do we build up manufacturing? How do we build up the areas where there are going to be good paying jobs in our national territory? And frankly, our government has neglected that. There's a couple reasons. One is, as I said, that we have this kind of the wrong ideology, which also goes along with the whole greed is good thing that got us the 2008 financial meltdown. But also, we've had our big companies, you know, that used to be here in the United States, now our biggest corporations, the ones that employ the armies of lobbyists and lawyers, they're multinational. They don't care if they make their profits in China or in Mexico or some other place. So they've not done push policy to build up the infrastructure and education and things here in the country. And so that's why, you know, I think our democracy is deeply in trouble, you know, partly because of the economic inequality, partly because of money in politics. And if we want to build a strong, vibrant middle class, we've got to rebuild manufacturing, we've got to rebuild high tech with broad support, and that's going to take a very different approach from what we've had for the last 30 years.
I also think it's really important for people to remember that the years between 1952 and 1960, that main post-war period, the president was a Republican, Dwight Eisenhower. So a lot of the ideas that you're talking about were not, before Reagan, were not considered left-wing. They were considered the center, and this is what they should be considered today. This idea of demonizing government coupled with this exaltation of the market as though the free market is always the answer. And you make such an excellent point. Many of these multinationals have no particular allegiance to the people of the United States, to the workers of the United States, and why should they? So when you have their corporate donations influencing and with an undue influence so much of the policy-making decisions of the U.S. government, because of Citizens United and so forth, what we have is what we have now, which is this real, it's more than toxic. It's really a situation that causes a lot of suffering and unnecessary suffering among the American people, and I think people elsewhere as well. Do you agree?
Well, that's exactly right. And if we look further, we have this ideology that, you know, you hire people in your corporations, in your banks, and it's their job to make the most profit, however they can, you know, legally or sometimes on the edges of legality. So if they can get Congress to write laws that help them get more profit, that's why we've got a tax system that's riddled with tax subsidies and loopholes. You know, we see Citibank literally writing the text that goes into the regulation of Citibank.
Yep.
And obviously, that's not going to work for the majority of people.
That's right, and they bring their lawyers right onto the House floor, as we all know. Well, when we look at this with any level of clarity at all, you can just imagine the huge forces that really, really enjoy having Fred Upton chairing the Committee on Energy and Commerce. So I assume they are giving huge amounts of money, PACs, super PACs, in order to make sure he stays in Congress. Would that be true?
Yeah, I ran last time, and the Koch brothers and some of their friends put up $300,000 against me. You had some kind of National Chemical Association that spent hundreds of thousands of dollars advertising for Fred. And, there's a reason they do that.
Yeah.
It helps their bottom line.
That's right. We should take it as a compliment. What do you need from us? How can we help you?
Well, I want your listeners to know, the people who are watching this, to know that if we want to have American leadership on climate change, that Congressman Fred Upton is the strongest opponent of that in the House of Representatives. But it's not just that. I'm sure that I'm not the only person talking about this, but we need all of us in Congress. If we want to build an economy that works for the people, not just for the very few people at the top, if we want to turn around the economic inequality, if we want to make the investments in education, everything from universal access to good quality preschool, dramatically improved K through 12, we need to have debt-free debt-free public universities. We need a lot more vocational. If we want to be creating the conditions where we can increase manufacturing in our national territory, have the high-tech jobs here in the United States, that we've got to get different people in Congress. Fred Upton is certainly an enemy of these things, and this is something I'm going to push for.
The reason we're doing this summit, Paul, is because I think there are a lot of people who agree with you who have not made, until now, a strong enough connection between that is what I want and I am therefore willing to support these candidates who stand for these things. And sometimes, and one of the reasons we wanted to do the summit is so that people like yourself get exposure around the country. I'm sure people in Michigan know who you are, certainly in your district know who you are. But in terms of the support you need, people all over the country need to know who you are. Congress is a co-equal branch of government, and no matter who is elected president, that we have people such as yourself in Congress to either support the values of the president, depending on who's elected, or resist the policies of the president is a big deal. Even now, we have a Democratic president, of course, but he supports the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Your views on this?
Yeah, right now, we see a wave of enthusiasm around the country for real political change. There's a lot of frustration. And some of that frustration, I think, is misdirected into, you know who I'm talking about here. Yeah. But certainly the understanding that our government is not working for the majority of the people. We've not had this degree of understanding of that since I was 20 years old. So we've got a real chance to take this country in a new direction. But we know that what I'm talking about and what I bet many of your candidates are talking about is threatening to the moneyed interests. They're not going to sit still for this.
That's right.
So the basic, our democracy is in trouble. Yeah. If that's going to be turned around, it's only going to be turned around by a lot of people getting behind the change, and that's what I need to ask people to help with.
Right. Our economy is at stake, our democracy is at stake, and the health and well-being of our planet and our grandchildren is at stake.
Indeed.
So you heard it here, Paul Clements. He's running for Michigan's 6th District. You can go to his website, clementsforcongress.com, CLEMENTS for Congress.com. And don't just go to the site. Do what you can. Paul, I hope you win. Please keep going. I'm behind you. I think a lot of people will be behind you. And please know how important this run is. And I know I will do everything I can to let people around the country know that we have a shot at replacing someone whose values are so not aligned with progressive ideals with you and your values and your passions and your education and your expertise is everything that we need in the U.S. Congress. And I hope with all my heart that you get there.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you. God bless you, sir.